Next we have Lance Jones, who's here from IBM, and I've been watching Lance and his team for a couple of years now at IBM, and they've been helping FDA CBER, the Center for Biologics, with their modernization effort, and they, at least from what I've seen, an amazing job. So Lance is going to explain the FDA BEST program, and Lance, feel free to take it away.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. All right, so I'm Lance Jones with IBM Consulting, and as Jay mentioned, we've been working with the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research at the FDA for several years now. The project is called BEST, which is Biologics Effectiveness and Safety. The T comes from safety, if anybody's wondering. Yeah, you had to make it fit. And the main goal of that project is to advance post-market safety and effectiveness surveillance. There are two main ways that IBM works with the FDA for this. One is a more traditional epidemiologic foundation, uses a lot of claims data or claims-linked data. And then there's the project that I lead, which is an innovative methods project. It started with a fairly high goal, which was to try to dig into electronic health records or real-world data to use real-world evidence in the case of post-market safety and surveillance. And as many of you might be aware, that idea of real-world evidence is across many different agencies. We all know that electronic health records were not developed for public health purpose, and their fitness for more scientific study or to truly adjudicate whether a biologic exposure led to an adverse event is somewhat of a question mark still. And so we were asked to come in for the Biologics Evaluation and Safety Project to deploy innovative methods to see what is the art of the possible with real-world data. There's also a known gap with claims data, specifically for biologics, because oftentimes you don't get the type of coding. So for instance, with transfusions, you might not get ISBT codes, which are necessary for actually reviewing and trying to understand what may have happened in a particular case. Vaccines are another example where you can get vaccines in many different locations, and so now you have split up data. Or you might have a clinical record that has a diagnostic code for an adverse event, but all you have is a clinical note that says, and they got a vaccine for flu a week ago. Don't know which vaccine, you don't know the lot number of the vaccine, so you're missing a lot of critical data. So part of the pilot that I'm going to be talking about today is the end of a multi-year journey that we've had. Let me make sure I'm pushing the right button. There we go. So this shows the stages of the BEST project. The very first year that we worked, we started with foundational partners. These were a couple research-oriented institutions that stood up sandboxes and allowed us to stand up multiple tech stacks to evaluate what can we do to try to improve the evaluation of adverse events post-biologic exposure. That initial work it became an end-to-end solution from data ingestion to running algorithms for detection, allowing clinical validations, and then ultimately reporting through to the FDA. Quickly, though, that solution had a couple problems. We were able to demonstrate that you can get valuable information out of electronic health records, but to do that is a fairly complex project. We ended up having a fairly sophisticated tech stack. This was also near the beginning of the pandemic, and going out to a lot of healthcare providers and saying, hey, we need you to stand up multiple servers and get your IT team in and give us some whitelisting and, oh, hey, take care of those patients too. You just can't do that at that point. The investment was far too high. The burden on providers was too high. And one of the goals ultimately for this was to decrease burden, not to increase burden and costs on providers across the country. So IBM started working with eHealth Exchange as well as leadership at FDA to evaluate what could be done if we had a cloud instance for the tools that we use, and that were the initial proof point tools, but connected to an exchange. And then the question is, what types of data could be possible? What would you need? What would the workflow be, et cetera? So a proof of concept happened in 21, and this year we're doing a pilot. The proof of concept showed that we were able to make those connections. We're able to use FHIR as the standard for the delivery of the data, but we do still need to prove out that the data will be sufficient for post-market biologic evaluations and effectiveness. So just having access to the data is kind of step one. And step two then is to truly evaluate those data. So that brings us to a question we get a lot, which is how do we initiate this? So early in the process, the FDA uses the idea of computational phenotypes, which is a method in the most simple sense. A computational phenotype could be a query. It could be a claims-based code type of query for structured data. And in fact, that's where we start. That is something that is widely capable across healthcare provider systems. There's not a lot of complexity in being able to execute a query against stored data. So we start with our claims-based phenotypes. We then go through a process to find out what additional data can enhance this, increase sensitivity, specificity, so that it has a high likelihood of being an adverse event and something that the FDA needs to look at or would benefit from looking at. In a couple cases, we did identify structured notes are quite important. There are a few publications at the end of this deck, which we will welcome anybody who wants to look at those. What we're doing now for what you'll hear is a detection use case, or you've heard a couple of people mention the idea of having providers run algorithms and then send data. Those right now are primarily these more simple claims-based algorithms, things that can more readily be executed without any additional high-tech investment. All right, so right now the general schematic for eHealth Exchange and IBM's solution for the FDA involves healthcare providers, which are shown here in green, the eHealth Exchange, which we have shown here in orange, and then the BEST platform, which is what my team is responsible for. The BEST platform is a series of microservice applications that support multiple workflows. The main one is that it ingests FHIR data through the exchange. It allows a rapid validation of cases that do come through. So it has a couple ways of running those phenotypes, nominating evidence. And so if you do get a clinician in front of a case, you can say, here's the pieces of evidence that are highly likely to be of interest. Because for some adverse events, there are a few things that are required both by the case definitions, but also are highly diagnostic for you to look at. So to speed up that process, it also does show those to the clinicians. It then reduces latency compared to what you would have if you've heard Dr. Forshee earlier today mention the current review of cases happens by calling, faxing, emailing, sending in mail. It can take weeks or months to get case data back. So let me go into a little bit more detail on the two use cases that we're supporting for the FDA. So this is the first use case is for us to detect and then validate exposures. So in this case, we would have an exposure that potentially happened at a provider site, shown on the left in green. And this could be multiple providers. So you could have a vaccine at a clinic, you could be in an emergency room with symptoms, and then you could be at your own provider's office where maybe additional tests get ordered. So multiple systems may contain very critical data to adjudicate whether or not an adverse event happened, and if that adverse event is in fact related to the biologic, which is of course a key consideration. So for multiple systems, the eHealth Exchange is able to receive pushed data through to the BEST platform, and then on the BEST platform, the applications that are built for the FDA can accelerate the review and send information to the FDA as a case safety report. All right, the second use case, and this one is more closely supported with existing technology. because this starts with data at rest on health systems. The FDA can be notified of a case. So for instance, a submission to MedWatch, submission to VAERS or FHIRS, which is the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, or the FDA Adverse Event Reporting System. If those cases are received and they want to look further, those are a key set of data, but sometimes to get that temporal relationship between exposure and symptoms, or to really understand, well, does this person have a history of? And that's one of the key things that we do. We don't just take the data around that exposure and outcome. We also do look at a window in front of. And so for different adverse events, you need to know, was there a history of this happening? For instance, like for anaphylaxis, if you have a lot of history of having issues as opposed to somebody who's never had any issues and they have a vaccine and then immediately have an issue, it's much more compelling evidence. So in this case, the FDA would have been notified of a case. They then can query through the eHealth exchange. Right now, it uses name, birth date, and geographic location is the way to do the matching. eHealth exchange then has the ability to fan out that query to multiple provider sites. Where there is a match, the eHealth exchange is pulling the data back. They then aggregate it into a FHIR bundle and send back to the best platform. And so this is what we refer to as the pool use case or a validation use case, because the goal is a known event has happened and the FDA wants to know, was this linked to an adverse event to the best of their ability to judge? And more importantly, if that's happening more than once or there are multiple events to review, there's a time-sensitive nature to look through and see, is something happening? All right, so as a workflow, these two use cases can work together. So this is the full detect, validate, and report workflow that we've proposed and we've been working with eHealth Exchange and FDA. The first is the detection. So it can start with federating out algorithms. Those algorithms then can identify a limited set of data which is pushed back to FDA through a health exchange. That then, if you need to query and get additional data, can pull in full charts. And then that can result in the final adjudication. The FDA is interested in both the detection and validation. The detection is a little bit more complex. Right now, we do have our algorithms. They're available publicly for the push use case, but we currently have them written in CQL. We tried to skate toward that puck, and the puck didn't go there. So we would love to see CQL support more nationally and across EHR vendor systems, but right now what has happened is several of our partners have had to take those CQL algorithms and turn them into SQL in their native language for whatever their health system has for stored data. And there you can get there could be some work, and that does involve somebody from their IT or analytics department to get involved. So there's a bit more work for the push use case right now. But we do have a couple partners who are working on that, and we have had initial success with the first pushes through the system. The second step then, the validation, we've had considerably more interest. For the validation use case, you need to install a FHIR endpoint that allows you to connect to eHealth Exchange. I'm sorry, a FHIR client that allows the connection through eHealth Exchange to your FHIR endpoints or to a partner's FHIR endpoint. All right. So to spell out the pool use case a little bit more, it is a REST API get for FHIR, so it is using the FHIR specs. This was built on FHIR. As far as we know, this is the first national use case of attempting to use FHIR for public health. And national being the key there. There are a couple other smaller regional projects that are in development. So after the REST API call, it sends two participants, identify potential matches. Those go back to the exchange, they bundle it, and send back. This all takes, it depends on a couple of variables, but it takes in the order of minutes, maybe 5 minutes, maybe up to 8, depending on some of the fanning out and the aggregation. That then goes to the BEST platform, where we're able to do additional processing for that adjudication step. What do we request? These are the FHIR resources. We can answer any questions if anybody has. I'm not sure if you can even see this at that font size. There are some things that would be really excellent to have, but are not currently supported. Medication administration for public health, for instance, is quite important. You do get settings where you order a medication, but it doesn't actually get administered. And when you're trying to line up a temporal sequence of events, you need to know that you actually did get the medication and when was that. Another one that would be excellent to have for more coverage would be biologically derived product. Obviously, working for the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, getting details about biologics from electronic health records would be fantastic. So if anybody's interested, we have links at the end to details about the biologically derived product, which we would love to see move into Common Core. Feel free to reach out. Yes, this is an advertisement. I really want people to adopt some of these. That'd be fantastic. All right, how can you participate? The first step is to reach out. Mike McCune, one of our key partners at eHealth Exchange, very willingly let me put his name here, I think. So thank you. You can also reach out to me. You also can reach out to eHealth Exchange, whoever your support is there. And the reason is they assist with the initial connection with the client to their endpoint. Why participate? This is a public health event, especially doing this work through the pandemic. I think was one of the few ways that I think a lot of my team remained sane, because we were actively trying to solve a problem that needed solved. So just the knowing that you are doing something for public health, I think, is a very powerful incentive. Also, the ultimate end state, especially for the push use case, would be to help automate some of that notification through to the FDA. Right now, although it is technically required to report adverse events, there's no stick being used. There's carrots versus sticks. You don't tend to see repercussions of not reporting, and so the FDA is concerned that there might be. Oh wait, this is my own personal. This is my own personal interpretation of events. This in no way reflects the FDA. My understanding is that the FDA would like to see more events. Yes, I work for a federal agency. So, and then of course we are also doing this. The very next step after receiving these data for the FDA is an analysis. And so part of that analysis, we are working with partners, and there is authorship potentially there, especially if you have a research arm, or if you know of a research active institution that might be interested. We'd be happy to have them join. All right, and the stretch goal, of course, is to move forward for that push use case for the detection and automation. As I mentioned, the technology is not quite there broadly across vendor systems across the country, but we are incrementally getting closer. So, all right, one other reason to participate, eHealth Exchange has also offered a waiver for up to 15 participants who are able to successfully, let me make sure I say this correctly. They're waiving the participation fee for 1 year if they successfully respond to the FDA production FHIR R4 APIs in accordance with the BEST Exchange requirements by 3/31/2023. So which is a fantastic incentive offered by the exchange. So if anybody is interested, please do reach out. The very next question we always get asked is, well, how many people have reached out? Here it is. We've had 31 participants reach out, but we then go through a process of trying to vet. So the next step then is a kickoff where we discuss how the project works, try to get all the stakeholders onto a call that can take a couple calls. Then we do a feasibility analysis for how ready might you be to connect and be able to send the data that's needed for this project. And there we have 11 participants that are in that stage. The next is then to go through testing with a validation and test environment. And at that point, we have 7 who have connected. So there's still room for the participation. a fee waiver. So again, reach out and we'd be happy to discuss moving forward on the project. And with that, I have time for questions. So there are several links for you if you want to see any of the papers that I mentioned. Additionally, we do have a FHIR implementation guide that the link to is here. Our biologically derived product on USCDI is also listed there. You can review and potentially support if you would like to talk to your EHR vendor about supporting that in your endpoint.
Well, excellent. Thank you so much for the presentation. I have one question, which is there any preferred organization type you're looking for? Is it acute care, ambulatory provider?
That is a very good question. So they do look for different adverse events. There are some that are, for instance, some adverse events, they want a young population because it's, for instance, MISC was amongst children. So they definitely want a younger group cohort. They want older cohorts for certain adverse events. But the answer is yes, they want national coverage ultimately, because the more diversity in the coverage of participants, the more they're able to see what is the benefit of this and how much can this help for safety or surveillance. There is a challenge with, so when you're using real world data, there is a possibility that the data you receive will vary, or its utility will vary by treatment type or type of facility, inpatient versus out. So that is a known issue. Question over here.
It's on. Hey, thanks. This is great. We mentioned it at the coordinating committee, and Hussein from the FDA couldn't be here because he's out of the country, but you guys won a poster award at AMIA, so that was fantastic. I think you need to change your acronym. I'm thinking because I couldn't find the T anywhere. Yes. Biologic effectiveness, safe technology on fire, maybe best on fire, I don't know. One, I really, Ray Duncan's here from Cedars. I joke about Cedars-Sinai, that they go first, I go next. So Cedars, big shout out to Cedars. For those of us who are would like to be involved, we're also working, several of us are working with our vendor to try to sort of put together sort of a vendor configuration guide to go with your implementation guide. My question, 4 hours seems pretty low. And I think that's just the query response fire back, correct?
That is, yeah, so that is getting the endpoint connected. So that's for the technical team, 4 hours. Prior to the technical team being involved, there would be meetings to discuss with leadership. Some participants go through a due diligence step where they review internally before beginning to proceed.
Okay, good. So because I got to tell my team it's a little more than 4 hours. That's one. Two is I assume we can do the adverse event query. We don't have to build out our automated reporting. That's a much bigger lift. That's a separate ask, correct?
Fully building out the automated, that is unlikely to happen within the next year.
Okay, good. I'm feeling better now. And then lastly, just one of the reasons why we're selling it, and I don't know if you want to talk about it, for our medical records department, they have to respond to these by law. It's less work for them, just like it was for the Social Security Administration disability claims. It's faster, it's better, it's safer. So we're using that as a plus. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for mentioning.
Hey, Craig, I'm curious about the data usability, and I think that might be the wrong term, but I think that IBM and CBER, FDA CBER, are going to be reviewing the data that's collected.
Correct.
And I'm curious what that usability analysis might look like. And the reason for that is that I have a preconceived notion that the data that FDA CBER is currently receiving is probably collected most of the time via fax, where someone's transcribed the data from an EHR, or via the I forget the name of the web form on FDA.
Yes, MedWatch. Yeah.
Yeah. Which I assume also involves the health system or the provider copying data from the EHR into that web screen. And so, am I missing something big? I'm thinking that by default, the data is going to be more complete and more accurate
Yes.
Am I missing anything?
So completeness is one attribute of data quality that we look at. We actually are using the Odyssey framework, and I don't have it in front of me. So it's completeness, plausibility, and I forget the third. It's continuity, maybe? I forget. But one of the things we do is the internal consistency of the case is one way that we can also look. And so by having access to unstructured notes, we have the ability to do even more comparisons just within a case. For completeness, that you can look across structured data, and then the plausibility is the challenge for when you get you get a lack of internal consistency, or you can see you have a variability between source with the data. So it's not an easy analysis. We're attacking it from multiple directions, but all of that is toward what is the quality of the data across systems for the purpose of particular adverse events. It does vary by adverse event as well, because the type of data you're going to look for, and whether or not it'll be in particular provider data is another aspect. So.
All right, that's helpful. Thank you.
Was there?
And Lance, just to follow up on
Yes.
on what you had said about saving time, how much time is typically saved? I mean, how much time does it typically take people to fill this information out?
So it's actually a more difficult question. The document burden that officially is listed for MedWatch forms for somebody to fill out a MedWatch form is 45 minutes. I think if you talk to pharmacists or doctors who had to get collect all the screens they needed, or even cut and paste and then get things copied into the form, I sometimes question if 45 minutes is actually accurate. It might be more than that. But that would be the amount of time to fill out a MedWatch form and submit through to VAERS.
Great, thank you.
And if we do get the push use case set up for a particular adverse event, conceivably you would not have a person need to do that. Yes.
Hi, yes, I'm Caprice Edwards from NAFSIS. We work with vital records. So I apologize if this is opening a can of worms, but how are you collecting or finding out if these adverse events lead to death?
Okay. So that is in some of the records. No. I'm trying to think. So it depends on the adverse event. Not all of them do have death as a potential outcome, but death is a potential outcome for some, and that is also then transmitted with the data. So, does that answer your question, or not quite?
Not quite. So if they don't die during that adverse event, but then die a day later in a different setting, are you able to collect that information from that other facility, or do follow-up to get that?
Yeah, so having a detection service longitudinally over time would be fantastic, but that is not where we are yet. Right now, especially for the pool use case or validation, these are typically post hoc. And so usually somebody has initiated letting the CDC or the FDA know about a case, and at that point, they would go back and look at the charts. So it's a good point on longer-term follow-up. Right now, we're on step one.
Sorry, one more bid
Sure.
for vital records. We are working with FHIR, so it would be a great opportunity, and we have an exchange network to connect them to see what could come of that. So I'll reach out to the contact listed.
Thank you. You have a question up front?
Lance, it's Jocelyn Keegan. How are you?
I don't know where I'm looking.
Over here.
Okay.
This is great. Congratulations. It's a huge accomplishment. My first question is whether you have anybody from the manufacturer side involved in the process as far as where the data goes back to life sciences?
Yes, so pre-market, post-market are somewhat two different worlds. We currently are not working on the pre-market side. The eventual workflow, especially on the FDA side, could then flow back to pre-market, is my understanding, but that's not part of the project that I'm on.
Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I just wanted to share is that the HL7 team actually funds really simple, short use case stories, like almost like mini white papers that they'll actually do for free for you with their marketing
We are up
dollars.
there. Yes, we have a use case out there. Feel free to go
Okay,
read about
awesome.
it.
It's a
Thank
good
you,
way to
though.
get the word out.
Yeah. No, that was a great opportunity to have that. Yeah, go ahead.
This is potentially a dumb question. The vaccines, it's the biologic part of the FDA. So are the mRNA vaccines considered biologic, or is it just we're looking for vaccine adverse effects in a general sense? Just more of my curiosity.
That is a can of worms.
Okay, sorry.
and I am a consultant, so
You win for the best answer for the day.
there is a split where some products, like monoclonal antibodies, are CDER with drugs, whereas the vaccines, the mRNA vaccines, we did work with. So I think that even if it was a different division, we worked on vaccines in total with FDA. But there are some, where that line gets drawn is hard to remember.
The reason I'm asking is if I was trying to recruit an organization to work with us as a EHEX implementer, the shorthand to explain to them, if I could say, oh, well, it's the vaccines for COVID or something along those lines. But if it's more complicated, I'll follow up. And
yeah,
I was hoping there was a simple answer, but I guess there isn't. So.
Yeah, we did, of course, with the COVID vaccines. That was a high priority to look at those data, and there's several publicly available papers that have come out of CBER on a lot of that work, so it's in the public domain. Right. Any other questions? We have one up front.
Thank you. Hey, regarding the blood product transfusion possibility down the road, my bad memory tells me that Stephen Lane and I tried to help get that added to a new version of USCDI. Do you happen to remember if that ever happened for the ISBT codes?
Yes, we're in level 2, I believe, and it could make it into the next version.
Okay.
I believe. We need people to implement it, and so once people use a new resource, then it gets moved forward. But people don't typically use a new resource unless it's in USCDI. So there's a chicken egg.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so that's one of the challenges. It is very important information, though, for public health to have the additional traceability details available. Also, just in transfusion centers and services, there's other work going on with transfusions with IGs to try to advance the utility of FHIR for transfusion centers. I think dialysis centers too.
All right, thank you.
Yep. All right. If there are no more questions, I'll hand it back. Thank you.